I want to begin with a question. Well, maybe it's a statement followed by a question, or a question that's followed by a statement that we can all agree upon. Anyway, so you know what's tough is a breakup, like a romantic breakup, right? It's tough. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but if you've ever been broken up with, raise your hand. I have. I know what it feels like. I'm not trying to. Don't like point or accuse people. Listen, it wasn't them. It was the other person. At least that's what we were told. It's not you. It's me, and you know that whole thing. But a breakup is tough. A breakup is really hard, and it's just kind of emotionally fatiguing and sad and lots of tears and lots of things like that. I remember in 2005, this must have been spring of 2005, I dated a girl for coming on 2 years. She's a girl that I went to church with, was at my high school. I'd gone off to college, it was my freshman year of college, and we were together nearly 2 years. And then one day she calls me because I was living in Jacksonville, she was living elsewhere, and she's like, yeah, I just think we need to take a break. And I was like, that's weird because I don't think that. And she's like, yeah, I think we just need to take a break. And don't worry, it's not you, it's me. I just got to sort my stuff out. I'm like, well, I'll sort it out with you. Like, I don't want to be dumped. I don't want to be broken up with. And it was on a Wednesday. You know how I know it was on a Wednesday? Because I was scheduled to serve with kids. You know, I talked about serving with kids, right? And so I was scheduled to serve with kids. And I said, I can't let these fifth grade boys see me as an emotional wreck. And so I just was a no-call, no-show on volunteering and serving at my church because she dumped me. No matter what I tried to do to talk her out of it, she just was convinced that it was her and that we needed to take a break, even though I didn't feel any of those things. And so she dumped me, and I was devastated. I was 18 or 19 or whatever, and I was like, how? I didn't see this coming. I didn't know this was happening. And so this was, like I said, somewhere in the spring. Well, in the first week of summer, my best friend and I decided to rent a beach house and on the panhandle of Florida. And so we were at this beach house talking, and he too was in a long distance relationship during his freshman year for part of it. And then he got broken up with, he got dumped. And so we were commiserating about, how we're both single guys who got dumped by our girlfriends, which is why we're hanging out together right now. And so come to find out, he got dumped on the same day as I did. I was like, I knew we were best friends. Like, I knew this is why we stick together. And it was like, like I said, I was 18, I was 19, whatever. And I was like, man, like my life is over. I can't believe this girl, I won't name her, this girl dumped me and left me, kind of by the wayside. And I bring that up because I think, for me anyway, the end of a teaching series is kind of like a breakup. Like, we're in the final week of this With You series. I know it seems like a bit much, but bear with me, I'm gonna explain. Because, I put all this emotion into it, all this thought. I kind of dream about the series. I think about what could be. I think about what would happen if this actually worked, or what would happen if people actually live like this. And then we get to the end of a series, and for most people, the series ends, and then you go on with your life as if nothing ever happened. And it's like getting dumped. It's like, oh man, I put all this time and energy and emotion and passion into this message or into this series or into this idea. And then a lot of times in church, we hear something, and then next week it's a new series. So next week we move on. And it's kind of like a breakup because I've cried up here. I shared that I got dumped. I talked about stories about my life. I talk about my kid. My wife is up here. And it's like, man, we just move on. But here's the catch. Because this series With You is literally called With You. And the whole idea is that you don't have to listen to a series to be with Jesus. Right? So it would be foolish if we finish out a series today and then, like a breakup, move on and act like that person or that series didn't exist. Right? I think that would be so confusing to say, yeah, for 6 weeks we're with you, Jesus, but as soon as we start a new series, we're moving on to the next thing. Right? So my hope and my goal in bringing all of that up is that we don't break up with the theme or the idea, and yes, we'll start a new series, or yes, we'll move our teaching into a different direction, but the messages and the application doesn't have to leave, or we don't have to leave that. Yeah. In fact, I think if we did leave those things, if we did move away from them, then we would actually be missing the mark of this entire series. Because if you want to go back 6 weeks, if you the starting point for this whole thing was a simple question that was around this. Is Jesus plus nothing everything to you? In other words, if Jesus came to you and said, hey, I will not give you what you're praying for. Hey, I will not give you what you're asking for. I will not give you what you're believing for, but I will give you me. Is that enough? Would that suffice? And if you're saying, yeah, I'm hoping so, I'm believing so, that's what I'm committed to, then it doesn't make sense to say, okay, yeah, 6 weeks ago I was committed to that, but now that we move into March and spring, we sprung forward and we start a new series and things are changing, well, I've kind of forgotten about that. So if you're saying, yes, I want to be with you, Jesus, and I don't want to break up with you, Jesus, I want to continue on with you, Jesus, then I've got good news. We got one more message, and I'm going to kind of share with you what's really like the linchpin for all of this, or what's really like the keystone or the glue that brings the previous 5 weeks all together and holds everything together. Are you ready for that? Yeah. Okay, good. I like that. That was enthusiastic. I was at a conference this past week. This isn't part of my notes. I was at a conference this past week, and the MC drove me nuts because every time he got on stage, he would ask like a question, and people were like, and he's like, oh, come on, you can do better than that. And then people were like, and he's like, oh, come on, you can do better than that. And like, it would be like 4 times. Every time he was on the stage, like, guy, like, come on. Clearly, we're not that into it. And it just kept, like, for 3 days, it was just brutal. But anyway, like I said, back to my notes. John chapter 2 is where we're going to be. In fact, I'm going to open up my Bible because that's where I'm supposed to be. So John chapter 2, starting in verse 1, and here's what it says. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana. See, Jesus doesn't want you to break up. He wants to be married to you. He wants to be connected to you. Weddings are a good thing. They're positive things. A wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Verse 2. And Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. Verse 3. The wine supply ran out. During the festivities. So Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. I think some of you may know this and some of you may not, but either way, I want to make sure we're all of the same understanding. In ancient Israel, in ancient culture, weddings were not like they are today where you go, for an evening and you have a celebration and then a dinner and dancing and then, all that stuff and then you move on. They had a dinner, they had dancing, but it didn't last like 3 hours. It lasted the course of an entire week. And so a wedding celebration wasn't just like a one-day instance. It wasn't just like, Friday night at 7 p.m. at such and such hall. It was a week-long celebration. And it was up to the bridegroom or the bride, either one, their families to provide enough food and refreshment and drink to last the duration of that celebration. Now, we're not told here why they ran out. We don't know if they didn't plan properly. We don't know if they had more guests show up, which is, hey, if you paid for a wedding, that's a problem. And so we don't know if more guests showed up, or we don't know if this wedding was just so lit that people went in on day one and never turned back. But somewhere, somehow, they ran out of wine. I've never been to a party like that. I've never been to a wedding that's like, hey, it's unlimited bar, open bar. You can drink as much as you want. And then the bartender's like, hey, we ran out of drink. Now, they ran out of drink somewhere down the line. And so Jesus' mother told him, hey, Jesus, they have no more wine. Verse 4, dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus like, I already brought my gift. I gave it. I put it on the table with the card. I don't need to do anything else. That's not my problem. I didn't pay for this wedding. And he replied to her, my time has not yet come. Verse 5, this is the key. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment. Isn't it weird to be an adult and still get mommed by your mom? You know what I mean? Like, isn't it weird? Like, you're a grown up, maybe you bought your own car, or you pay your own bills, or you live on your own and you've not been dependent upon your parent for forever, and then somehow you talk to them and they still mom you. You know what I mean? Like, hey, well, listen, this is what you need to do. And it's like, I don't need to do that, or I'm 33 years old. I'm a man. And like, my mom is still trying to mom me. Jesus' mom, Mary's like, do whatever he tells you to do to the servants. In other words, Jesus, listen, your time has come. It's time to show up. It's time to do something. It's time to act. Jesus like, it's not my problem. Mary's like, yes, it is. I'm about to make it your problem. She totally moms him. But then the key in all of this is that phrase, is that statement, do whatever he tells you. Now, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but we need to hang on to that because we need to see what happens as the servants respond to what Jesus does. So standing nearby, verse 6, were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Verse 7, Jesus told the servants, like a good son, he obeyed his mom. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. And when the jars had been filled, verse 8, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. Verse 9, when the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. A host always serves the best wine first, he said. Then, when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine, but you have kept the best until now. Now, let me explain what he means here. Usually, again, week-long celebration, drinking food the entire course of the week. And so as a host, you would present your best first. And you would present your best food first, you would present your best drink first. And part of the reason for that is because you wanted to give the best first impression you could give. Another part of the reason of that is because when people are drinking all week long, by the time they get to Friday, they don't care what they're drinking. So it doesn't matter if it's good anymore. All they care about is, are they still drinking? And so he says, but you have kept the best until now. And then this message, this series is coming to a close today. And I want to end it with this title of Saving the Best for Last. Saving the best for last. Because I think one of the things that we kind of miss out on is that, yes, Jesus brings us his best, and I'm going to talk about that too. But we miss out on the fact, or we don't see the fact that if we kind of do everything we did or everything we talked about for the first 5 weeks of this series, but we miss out on this one key thought, then we've missed the mark entirely. And so in a sense, I wanted to save my best for last. Because if you've liked what you've heard, if you've appreciated what you've heard, if you've been changed by what you've heard, then the key, the glue, the linchpin to all of it is going to be this idea, this simple thought of listening to Jesus and doing what he says. If you want to be with Jesus, if you want Jesus to be with you, if you want to experience the richness, the vastness, the fullness of what God wants to do in your life, of how Jesus is going to move through your life, if what the Holy Spirit is going to produce out of your life, then it's all going to be contingent upon your ability to listen to Jesus and do what he says. You see, the servants experienced something. The servants encountered something. Everyone benefited from it, but the servants got to partake in it. And if you want the miraculous to take place in your life, if you want something glorious to be demonstrated or revealed in your life, then it's not just going to be good enough to be on the peripheral. It's not just going to be good enough to be kind of an observer or standing by and saying, wait, let me see what happens. It's going to require that you say, okay, I want to hear Jesus speak into my life, and I'm going to respond in faith and do exactly what he tells me to do. Yeah, come on. And in that way, what you'll find is that everything will be changed. Everything will be transformed. Listen, everyone at the wedding got the blessing of the miracle. Right. But only the servants, in fact, John makes that point, though the servants knew where the miracle was provided. Yeah. The servants knew where this wine came from. Right. The servants understood what it took. Now, I think we would all agree that this is something, I would imagine, I could be wrong here, but I don't think if I were to say, hey, who disagrees with this or who doesn't want this, I don't think I'd see any hands go up. I could be wrong. I think most of us, it's a safe bet that most of us would say, yes, I want to listen to Jesus and do what he tells me to do. But if we're honest, we know this is not easy, right? We know this is not as simple as a cute slide that stacks evenly and looks perfectly on a TV display. Life just doesn't work that way. Life is just not that simple or clear or black and white even. And it's why, for good or for bad, we fall and we frustrate ourselves and we disappoint ourselves, or we screw up, or we get things wrong, or we go somewhere we know we shouldn't go, or do something we know we shouldn't do. And then we get discouraged and disheartened because we're like, man, I know better than that. I knew I shouldn't have done that, or I knew like I should have been more committed in this, or I knew I should have taken this. And we can beat ourselves up over it. And so we know like, hey, yeah, I want to listen to Jesus. I want to do what he says. But Ricky, it's not that easy. And I'm saying, yeah, I'm with you. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. In fact, there's things that get in the way. And in this story, there were things that stood in the way as well. In fact, one of them was found in verse 6. If you look back at verse 6, we'll put it back up on the screen for you. It says, standing nearby were 6 stone water jars. Now, this may not mean much to you, but what these water jars represented was the size of the problem. The size of the problem. You see, it says that, or John says that each of these gallons, or each of these jars could hold somewhere between 20 to 30 gallons. This is not your cute little cocktail mason jar that you use in the spring and summer. This is a stinking fish tank. 20 to 30 gallons big. In fact, these weren't used for winemaking. These weren't used for anything other than ceremonial washing. The reason they were so big is because they would be pouring out water onto your feet or onto your hands or dipping your hands or dipping your feet into these giant jars. And anytime the scriptures make reference to something specific, like a number or the size, then you better take note, because just like you would tell a story to a friend, you wouldn't believe it. There were 17 cop cars or 17 fire trucks or 13 hot dogs or whatever it was that you saw. I don't know why hot dogs just came to mind. I'm thinking 4th of July. When we went to the hot dog eating contest, it was like 68 hot dogs in 12 minutes, like mind blowing. You don't forget stuff like that. It just stands out. And in John's mind, the number of jars for 6 20 to 30 gallon jars to be present, like represented the size, the improbability of this miracle, the unlikeliness or unlikelihood of something being done, of something fruitful, of something of value. I mean, think about how, these servants must have felt when Jesus' mother's like, hey, do whatever he tells you. And they just, hey, grab those water jars. Wait, what? The ones that people put their feet in? The ones that we pour out for hands? Like, what? We ran out of wine, Jesus. We ran out of drink. We don't want these jars. It just seemed so ridiculous. And I think there are some people who feel like the size before you, the obstacle before you, the challenge presented to you, the problem in your life, the size of it just feels so overwhelming, so ridiculous, so out of place that you don't know what Jesus could do with it. I don't know how I'm going to get from point A to point B. I don't know how I'm going to go from being single to being married. I don't know how I'm going to get from this job to this job. I don't know how I'm going to get from this situation to that situation. I don't know how my finances are going to go from negative to positive. I don't know how any of this is going to work. The size of the problem is too big. It's too overwhelming. It's too cumbersome. And yet the size of the problem is what Jesus leveraged to present the opportunity of the miracle.
Yeah, come on.
And so he took this thing. He took these 6 things that were just unfathomable, that were just so big that it literally stood out in John's mind and thinking, this is absurd. And maybe what you find in your life is that what you need is the size of your faith to increase.
Yeah.
It's not just about the size of the problem, but the size of your faith. And you say, well, how am I going to get there? How is this going to work out? Or how is this going to unfold? I'll tell you how. Listen to Jesus, do what he says. It may not make sense, but if he tells you grab 6 water jars, you grab 6 water jars. It may not make sense, but if he tells you to step into that uncomfortable situation, then you step into that uncomfortable situation. It may not make sense, but if he tells you get out of that uncomfortable situation, then you get out of that uncomfortable situation. It may not make sense, but if he tells you to step, you step. If he tells you to go, you go. If he tells you to stay, you stay. You do whatever it takes to listen to Jesus and do what he says, no matter the size of the problem, no matter the size of the challenge or the size of the obstacle, because the size of the faith that he's trying to produce in you is greater than the obstacle.
Yeah, come on, that's good.
And so you listen to Jesus and you do what he says.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just the size. We'll go back to verse 7. It says this, fill the jars with water. Fill the jars with water. It wasn't about the size alone, but it was about the work. It was about the work. You see, there's this misnomer in Christianity that, well, listen, I just got to pray and leave it all in God's hands and he'll take care of it all. And maybe he will. But I'm of the type that says, listen, when God wants to stretch my faith, when God wants to provide, when God wants to lead me through those trying times of my health, or when he wants to lead me through those challenges of my work, or when he wants to lead me through the challenges of my faith, it's not just about me sitting back, propping my feet up on the sofa and saying, okay, God, you do your thing and I'll sit back here and watch. But it's the work. What am I committed to doing? Who am I committed to becoming? Where am I committed to going? You see, this thing with these jars, again, we'll go conservative. We'll say they were 20 gallons, not 30 gallons. But 20 gallons for 6 jars, obviously is 120 gallons. A gallon, on average, a gallon of water weighs an average of about 8 pounds. So you're talking about 1,000 plus pounds of water that needed to be fetched in order to fill the jars. And it wasn't like going to a tap and turning it on. Or in the South, what do they say, a spigot? Taking a spigot and twisting a spigot. Like, it's a spigot? What is a spigot? I moved to the South where, just, cut off the spigot. I'm like, cut off a spigot? What is a spigot and what do you cut off? You mean turn on the hose? And they're like, yeah. This is like the opposite of those things. Anyway, and so it wasn't that. They had to go to a well. And out of this well, they had to lower buckets, or a bucket. And then they had to pull that thing up and then pour it into this jar. And they had to do this dozens and scores of times. This was back-breaking work. Now, I don't know if it made more sense for them to pull the bucket out of the well, carry it to a jar, fill it, then bring it back, or if it made more sense to bring the jar, fill it, and then carry a 120-pound jar back to their place or wherever they needed to be. But regardless of the method, it was going to take work. This was not going to be easy, and this was not going to be fast. You see, I think a lot of times we get discouraged because we're like, man, I've been praying, I wish it would just flip. I wish it would just turn. I wish it would just change. I wish God would just answer. I wish he would just provide. And we think, well, I prayed for this, so it should be easy, right? Because I said the magic words, I rubbed the genie, and nothing happened. And then we get discouraged. It wasn't easy. And we're not patient because, well, I've been praying for 6 months or a year or longer. And so it's like, but man, how come, God? I've been doing this for such a long time and nothing is working or nothing is changing and things aren't switching. And we're so discouraged and so frustrated in all of this. And yet, Jesus says, keep doing what I tell you to do. Keep working at what I told you to work at. Listen, remaining in Jesus' love is work. Yeah. You've read that passage in John 15 where Jesus says, abide in me and I in you. Anyone who doesn't abide in me cannot produce fruit apart from me. And he says, abide, remain. Those are cute. Those are passive. That's work. Because everything in this world is trying to pull you away from Jesus. Yeah. Everything in this world is trying to stretch you and tear you apart from Jesus. Yeah. You're saying, hey, I want to be with you, Jesus. Well, that's going to take work. It's going to require that you cut off the things that pull you away. It's going to require that you stop engaging in things that are distracting you. It's going to require that you stay firm when people are telling you to go elsewhere. Yeah. This is work. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be frustrating. And it may not happen overnight. But if Jesus said it, then listen, the best thing you can do is listen to Jesus and do what he says. If you want to sit here and say, well, I don't know, Jesus, I mean, the semantics of this, the logistics, we don't have a spigot, we don't have a faucet, and so how are we going to get all this water and do this? I didn't sign up for this. And maybe you didn't. But if Jesus told you to do it, then the best thing you can do is say, well, I didn't sign up for this, but I will now. I didn't agree to this, or I didn't understand this was coming, but now that you've said it, Jesus, I'll do it. Listen to Jesus and do what he says. And then once you do the work, it wasn't just the work, it wasn't just the size, but the next problem found in verse 8 says this. It says, now dip some out. Again, older generation, when I dip, you dip, we dip, right? Yeah, they had to do it in unison. The group had to get together, now dip some out. But this, I know I just referenced freak nasty in a church sermon on Jesus. We'll edit that one out of the podcast. Pay attention. Now dip some out. Now dip some out. This speaks to the results. The results. Which I think most of us, or if not all of us, would struggle to embrace because we don't like things out of our control. And here's what I can tell you about me. If Jesus can say, hey, listen, grab those jars, say, well, that's stupid, but okay. Jesus can say, now fill them. Man, that's going to freaking hurt my back. But okay, I'll do this. I'll fill the jars with water. Now he's like, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremony. Like, now you're trying to make me look like a fool. I know what I put in that jar. It was water. I know what I pulled out of that well. It was water. But now you're asking me to dip something out and take it to give to the person who's supposed to distribute this to the people here celebrating, and now I'm going to look like a clown. And the reason why that bothers me is because the results are the thing I want to control the most. The results are the thing that I want to predict. I want to look at data. I want to look at a chart. I want to be able to say, hey, if I do X plus Y, I know Z is going to be the outcome. If I do step 1 and step 2, then I know step 3 or the ingredients of these two things combining is going to lead to what I want. And yet the servants, after they had done the work, after they had overcome the size of the problem, were now expected to trust that the results would be good. And it wasn't just that the results were so good. It was that that results were good enough, I should say, is that Jesus took the results and made them better than anything they had experienced that week. Yeah, come on. You see, because Jesus isn't just content with good enough. Yeah. Right. He's always bringing and giving his best. He's never settled. Now think about that for a second. You know how many times we coast at work? You know how many times like the boss on vacation, like, yeah, okay. Or like some of us are like now piloting or working like in remote situations because of what's going on with health concerns. And it's like, oh shoot, I can sit back and watch a little TV. As long as I'm on Slack, everyone's good. Like I used to have this job where I had work from home Wednesday. I was doing anything but working. I was home, but I wasn't working. I had Slack on my phone. I made it look like I was doing stuff. Someone responded. I'd respond within 3 minutes. That way they felt like, man, he's engaged. He's connected. I was not doing anything. We slack off. That's part of our nature, but it's not part of Jesus' nature. Come on. He's never slacked off. He's never been a slouch. He's always given his best. He's always offering his best. And so this water turning into a beautiful, great red wine was his best. Now you say, Ricky, how do you know it was red? Because real men don't drink white. That was it. That's all. Too far? Listen, I'm a red man. I drink reds. Jesus is all about the reds. He turned this water into wine. And the thing that you need to understand is that when you listen to Jesus and you do what he says, he is always going to give you his best. Yeah. He is always going to take what's improbable and turn it into something miraculous, but something far greater than you've ever had or better than you've ever experienced. He's always going to take what seems impossible and not just make a way, but the way is going to be so abundantly better than any other way you could have considered or taken that you realize this was not just a way, it was the only way. Yeah. And you'll be so satisfied, so content in that you won't look for anything else. Yeah, come on. But it's all contingent upon you listening to Jesus and doing what he says. Now, I've got to spin this because I think it's really easy to look at this and start thinking, okay, well, what could Jesus do for me? But Jesus isn't thinking about what he can do for you. He's thinking about what he wants to do with you. Yeah. You see, being with Jesus isn't about what he does for you. Being with Jesus is about what he does with you. Right. And so this isn't about, okay, I'm with you, Jesus, so that I can get this outcome. I'm with you, Jesus, so that I can get this provision. I'm with you, Jesus, so that I can get something good or something beneficial for my life or something that I've been craving for or longing for in my life. This is about, I'm with you, Jesus, because you got something for me. You got to do something in me. You got to do something through me. And the good news is he wants to do it with you. Yeah, come on. Yeah. And to illustrate this, I want you to kind of see what I'm talking about here. So Eric, if you would just go back and grab my little metaphors here or my illustrations, because I think we need to visualize what I'm talking about. And we need to see the dynamic here. Everyone can look back. You're all trying to be good students. You can look back, see what he's bringing. It is a glass of water and a glass of red wine, for clarification. Now, I'm going to do a little chemistry. I wasn't good at chemistry. The only reason I passed high school chemistry is because I had a basketball coach who cared. And that basketball coach helped with my grades more than I did. But I know some basic components of chemistry. Water is one of the most basic chemical compounds. You might, in fact, remember this formula, or this kind of, not formula, but component. H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. In fact, 2 lesser parts of hydrogen combining together with 1 greater part of oxygen forms what we call water, right? H2O, one of the most basic chemical compounds known to man. Water is water is water. Now, depending on where you get your water, it could taste funny, it could taste different, whatever. but water as a substance is the same thing. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But Jesus took this basic, simple thing and he transformed it into this, a glass of wine. Not just a glass of wine, but 20 gallons times 6 produces about 800 bottles of wine. Now, in order for this to take place, this isn't faith, this is science. In order for this to go to this, there needed to be, at a minimum, 100 different chemical reactions. You get what I'm saying? Like, this is basic, H2O. And in order for water to turn into wine, there needed to be at least 100 different types of chemical reactions. The least of which, the simplest of which, is a process that, I'm gonna read this because I wanna make sure I say it right. Glycolysis, okay? Glycolysis is a simple, like the most fundamental chemical compound in wine, okay? Now, over 100 different chemical reactions, glycolysis is just one. This is H2O, this is water, this is glycolysis. The most basic chemical reaction. If you can read that, props to you. I just got this off of Wikipedia. Listen, I'm revealing all my secrets. But this image, this compound, is just one of the things that needed to take place in order for water to turn into wine. In order for Jesus to take 6 jars and turn them into 800 bottles. In order for Jesus to take something that is simple to something that is complex, rich, abundant, and literally has an infinite number of combinations and varietals and flavors and depths and experiences. Jesus took something that was simple and basic and transformed it into something rich and satisfying. And it wasn't just rich and satisfying on the way of, well, that was good, but that was the best. That was the best. And you know what's incredible about this? What's incredible about this is that Jesus did this in an instant. He did it in a moment. You see, if you wanted to go home today, say, man, that message really inspired me, I'm gonna make my own wine. And you wanted to go home today and make your own wine, you could actually produce a wine that 2 to 3 months from now you could drink. Now, it'd be fine, it'd be okay. But winemakers and vintners know no one is trying to drink a 2-month-old wine. In fact, every blog, everything you'll read, every magazine article, every post about wine will tell you nothing can substitute aging of a wine, or the aging of a wine. That the longer you wait, the better it gets. So while you might be able to do something in 2 months, that's great. The shortest time a winemaker or wine producer will go is typically 12 to 15 months from vine to shelf. But even those are like, well, they're kind of suspect or underrated. The average, or the ideal, I should say, aging potential of a wine might look something like this. So different on your left types of wine, and then the aging potential on the right, meaning that this isn't how long it takes to produce that type of wine, as much as you could age a wine for this long in order to find its prime or its optimum, taste and experience. Anywhere from 5 years on the short end up to 20 years for an Italian wine called a Nebbiolo. So I read that some of the best wines on the planet are Nebbiolios that are aged 50 plus years. Can you imagine waiting 50 years to get a wine? To taste the fruit? To produce something or to bank on something that 50 years from now, this is gonna be at its peak, it's gonna be at its best. Now, this is crazy. We can go back to the title slide, because here's what I want you to know. This is what Jesus did with water. What could he do with you?
Yeah, come on.
What will he do with you?
Yeah, come on.
This is the most basic thing. And yet you are his most prized possession.
Yeah, that's good.
This is nothing. We need it. We use it. We appreciate it. But it's not you. Jesus didn't die for water. He died for you. He gave his life for you. And what would happen in your life if you said, okay, Jesus, I'm going to listen to what you say. I'm going to do as you tell me. I'm going to be with you through it all. Where would your life be a year from now? What could Jesus transform? Not 3 months from now, not from 6 months from now, but in an instant. What would happen if Jesus just spoke over your life and you responded in faith and said, that's what I'm going to do. That's who I'm going to be. That's where I'm going to step. That's how I'm going to go. And Jesus took what was offered and said, if I could do this with water, here's what I could do with you. If I could take something that was basic and make it rich, what could happen in your life? If I could take this problem that was insurmountable and make it nothing and sneeze at it, what would happen with your life's problems? If I could take this situation that seemed like, man, I don't know how the outcome is going to turn out. I don't know what the results are going to be. And Jesus said, listen, the results don't matter because I'm the king of results. I always produce. I always give my best. And when my power is added to this, your life is multiplied. Your process is advanced. It's accelerated in a way that nothing, nowhere could do. You see, the best wines take 5, 7, 15, 20 years to come to their best fruition. And Jesus, in a moment, brought his best.
Yeah, it's so good.
You say, well, man, 5 years from now, I hope to be here. Jesus said, I don't need 5 years. Just give me 5 minutes of your time.
Come on.
Give me 5 inches of your heart.
Yeah.
Give me $5 out of your wallet. Give me $5 of your faith. Just give me a portion of it. Give me all of it and see how quickly I can turn things around. See how quickly I can respond. See how quickly I can move. Not just to provide the need or fulfill the need, but to transform your life. Yeah. This is why we choose to be with Jesus. Not so that something good happens, not so that something blessing comes our way, but so that we are completely and radically transformed. So that who we used to be doesn't even compare to who we are today. When you look back at that version of you, you say, I don't know that person. I don't see that person. I remember them from a distance, but that's not who I am because when I was with Jesus, my life was completely transformed.
Yeah, come on.
This is the power of being with Jesus.
Yeah.
But this is only experienced when you listen to Jesus and do what he says.